People Power Party agrees to the idea of holding a referendum to revise the constitution on the day of the upcoming presidential election. The Democratic Party says it agrees in principle, but says the country should first focus on addressing the insurrection. The date for the snap election is likely to be set at June 3rd, as sources say it'll be confirmed at a cabinet meeting tomorrow. Rival parties are quickly switching to prepare for the race. Local stocks plunged more than 5% on Monday on fears over major U.S. tariffs. In the morning, program trading on KOSPI had to be halted at one point. It's April 7th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. With the country slated to hold an early presidential election in the weeks to come, politicians start responding to the idea of revising the constitution. Kim Do-yeon covers responses from rival parties.
The leaders of South Korea's two major parties on Monday gave the green light to National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik's proposal for constitutional reform in light of the upcoming presidential election. But it came with a caveat, as the chair of the Democratic Party of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, is cautious as there are more important tasks at hand.
But right now, what's far more urgent and important is preventing the destruction of democracy. The immediate focus should be on ending the insurrection. I hope the People Power Party isn't thinking of using constitutional reform as a way to simply move past this. But yes, reform is necessary.
However, he confirmed that he agrees that certain aspects of the Constitution need to be changed, such as adding the spirit of the Gwangju May 18th pro-democratization movement to the Constitution, among other things. Laws need to be revised for this nationwide referendum to happen, and he has agreed to get work done to make it possible alongside the presidential election in less than 60 days. In terms of the presidential term, he agreed on 2 4-year terms like the US model. Meanwhile, the People Power Party welcomed the constitutional reform proposal while saying that they're already working on the details from their side.
It's not just about dispersing power. The system must be restructured so checks and balances function properly. Just as presidential powers are being reviewed, the authority of the National Assembly must also be adjusted in a balanced way.
Kwon said that as much as the presidential authority needs to be adjusted, the parliament's authority needs to be adjusted as well. At the moment, the parliament has impeachment motion power over 4 different branches of government, and Kwon says it has been imperialistic with its power recently, as the opposition holds the majority of the floor. He said no one expected this in 1987 when the current constitution was passed, saying it needs to reflect the world we live in now. Speaker Woo, after the two leaders' comments, welcomed the two main parties are on board with the constitutional reform. But as the DP leader was cautious, the referendum targeted for the next presidential election in less than 60 days can just be on what's agreed upon until then. With the presidential powers at the heart of the constitutional reform debate, voters heading to the polls in less than 60 days won't just be choosing the next president. They'll also be weighing each party's vision for the presidency and its powers, especially in the wake of a push for a martial law rule by a former president. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And preparations are underway for an early election, most likely on the 3rd of June. Shin Ha-young has the latest. The date for South Korea's 21st presidential election has been tentatively set for June 3rd. That's according to Yonhap News Agency, with the date expected to be confirmed at Tuesday's cabinet meeting. South Korea's presidential race is heating up as rival parties roll up their sleeves to prepare for a 2-month race following the Constitutional Court's decision to remove former President Yoon Suk-yeol from office. The People Power Party formed an election committee on Monday for the upcoming presidential primary. The party chose Hwang Woo-yeol, a former party interim leader and former 5-term lawmaker, as its election committee chair.
Since Wang recently served as our party's interim emergency committee leader after the general election, he knows the party well. We believe he's the right person to run the primary fairly and objectively.
The party on Sunday decided to continue with its current leadership, with interim leader Kwon Young-se and floor leader Kwon Song-dong set to stay to carry out the remainder of the presidential election process. The party does not have a clear frontrunner, with some local media outlets expecting as many as 10 contenders to enter the race. Among them is Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo, who hinted at another run after he finished second to Yoon Sung-yeol in the party's 2022 presidential primary. Seoul Mayor Oh Se-un is also frequently mentioned as a potential candidate. The most high-profile name, however, is former party chair Han Dong-un, once a close confidant of Yoon, who later distanced himself from the former president and publicly supported impeachment following the martial law declaration. Meanwhile, Democratic Party chair Lee Jae-myung, widely seen as the likely DP candidate, is expected to step down from his leadership role and make an official declaration to enter the race as early as Wednesday. Running as party chair could raise concerns about bias in the primary process. Local media anticipate that his formal announcement will come when the presidential election date is officially confirmed. Once he steps down, the DP plans to hold a meeting to set up an election committee for the primary.
We only have about 30 days for the primary, so we need to sort out any party rules, make changes if needed, and set up the election committee to get ready for the presidential race.
Politicians outside East faction within the DP are also preparing to enter the race. Among them, former DP lawmaker Kim Do-gun was the first to make an official declaration to join the race. 신하영, Arirang News.
Major U.S. tariffs are sending shockwaves across global stock markets. Today, Korean stocks were in free fall, down over 5%. Trading had to be halted in the morning to ward off panic selling. Lee Soo-jin reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff announcements have triggered massive sell-offs across South Korea's stock market. The Korea Exchange at 9:12 a.m. on Monday activated a sell-side sidecar for the first time in 8 months when the KOSPI 200 futures index fell 5.19% to 312.05. A sidecar is triggered when the KOSPI 200 futures index rises or falls by 5% or more and stays there for at least 1 minute. On Monday, the sidecar was activated for 5 minutes. And stock indexes also took a hit amid mounting investor concerns over the impact of U.S. tariffs. Both the benchmark KOSPI and the tech-heavy KOSDAQ closed down more than 5%, the KOSPI down 5.57% to around 2,328, and the KOSDAQ 5.25% to 651. But one expert said a decline of this size is likely a temporary phenomenon, which is why a circuit breaker, triggered when the KOSPI and KOSDAQ indexes fall by 8% or more, is unlikely to be activated.
Today's market decline was likely driven by last Friday's slump in the U.S. market and President Trump's hardline stance over the weekend, which led to a 3 to 4% drop in U.S. futures that triggered foreign investor sell-offs. As such, the downturn is unlikely to continue for long.
The loss was led by foreign investors offloading shares as they reacted to sharp losses in U.S. markets. On Friday local time, Wall Street suffered sharp losses with the broad-based S&P 500 closing down 6%, the tech-heavy Nasdaq 5.8%. And the Dow Jones fell around 5.5%. This marked the second straight day of major losses, with the S&P and Dow Jones both suffering the biggest one-day drop since June 2020 on Thursday. In the foreign exchange market on Monday, the Korean won weakened against the dollar, closing at around 1,467, down 33.71 from the previous session after briefly topping 1,470 during intraday trading. The same expert said this reflects fears of a potential global economic downturn, noting that Korea's exchange rate with the dollar has surpassed the 1,401 mark 3 times in the past, during the 1997 IMF crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, and the U.S. Fed's aggressive rate hikes in 2022. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Against this backdrop, a baseline U.S. tariff of 10% on all imports entering the American markets went into effect this past weekend, and the country's specific duties are poised to take effect on Wednesday, with no prospect of a postponement. Moon Ji-young has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has refused to back down on tariffs on imports from most countries, despite the market turmoil they have caused. Speaking to reporters on Air Force One on Sunday evening, Trump characterized the tariff duties as quote medicine, while panicked investors continued a massive sell-off of global stocks. He warned foreign governments that they would have to pay a lot of money to lift sweeping tariffs.
I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me a deficit is a loss. We're going to have surpluses, or we're at worst going to be breaking even.
When asked about a potential trade deal with China, Trump underscored that no agreement would be reached unless the U.S. trade deficit with Beijing, currently at $1 trillion, is addressed. He also claimed that tariffs caused China to pull back from a deal regarding TikTok, which was nearly finalized, highlighting this as evidence of, quote, the power of tariffs. In response to tariff on Europe, Trump stated that the U.S. cannot afford to spend heavily on NATO to protect Europe while losing money on trade. Meanwhile, speaking to NBC on Sunday morning, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said more than 50 countries have begun negotiating with the U.S. since the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs. The comments go in line with Trump's remarks last week that every country has called the U.S. for talks. On the same day, Trump shared a post on social media that massive financial deficits can be cured only with tariffs, calling them a, quote, beautiful thing to behold. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
South Korea has pledged to ramp up efforts in response to China's recent export restrictions on rare earth elements. Following a meeting on Monday with relevant stakeholders, including the trade and foreign ministries, the government aims to secure a public and private inventory of these minerals while preventing any lack of supply. As it is not an entire export ban, countries can still import elements such as graphite and gallium after obtaining an export permit from China's Ministry of Commerce. This comes amid Beijing's export controls as part of non-tariff retaliatory measures against the U.S. China provides around 90% of the world's rare earth supply, which is used to make weapons, electronics, and other consumer goods. South Korea's industry minister met with high-ranking government officials from the Philippines on Monday to discuss ways to strengthen economic cooperation between the two countries. Minister An Dok-gun held talks in Seoul with a 23-member Philippine delegation, during which both sides pledged to expand cooperation in trade, investment, and supply chain resilience. They also agreed on the importance of deepening collaboration in critical minerals and clean energy. The meeting comes as South Korea is seeking to diversify its export markets in response to growing global trade uncertainties caused by U.S. President Trump's tariff campaign. A state-run think tank has highlighted the presence of greater external risk factors to the Korean economy, notably U.S. trade barriers. Moon Hae-ryun explains.
A state-run think tank has diagnosed continued downside risks to South Korea's economy for the fourth consecutive month, citing growing uncertainties in global trade. In the April edition of its monthly economic trends report, the Korea Development Institute stated that external conditions are rapidly deteriorating in light of the recent tariff announcement from the United States. And paired with a slowdown in both domestic and global demand, the situation is exacerbating. Last week, Washington announced that it would impose tariffs of 25% on South Korean goods and a separate 25% tariff on global automobiles and auto parts. Automobiles are South Korea's top export to the United States, with nearly half of the country's total auto shipments headed there last year. The KDI noted that if the US continues to escalate its protectionist trade measures, as US President Trump has threatened to do, it could further erode corporate sentiment and hinder investment and export growth. While South Korea's exports rose by more than 3% in March, the think tank warns that this recovery remains fragile, with exports in the first quarter of the year showing a contraction due to a slowdown in the ICT sector. The KDI also pointed to continued sluggish consumer spending as another drag on the economy. While internal consumption of durable goods briefly rebounded thanks to a temporary tax cut on automobiles for the first half of the year, overall retail sales for January and February were down with persistent weakness in sales of semi-durable and non-durable goods. Consumer sentiment in March stayed pessimistic, with the central bank's consumer sentiment index data showing that it has yet to recover to levels seen before the martial law declaration last December. Going forward, the think tank stressed the importance of closely monitoring both global development and domestic demand to avoid further drag on recovery. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, Russia continues its air attacks on Ukraine, despite U.S. efforts to hammer out a ceasefire. Pyongyang reports.
Twisted steel beams, shattered windows, and other mangled remains of residential blocks now scar the skyline of Kryvyi after a Russian missile strike on April 4th killed at least 20 people, including children playing in a park. Dozens were injured. As Ukraine observed a day of mourning, Russia launched more missiles and drones at Kyiv on Sunday, killing one and wounding several others. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks and criticized the U.S.'s tepid response to the attack on Kryvyi, his hometown.
Staying silent about the fact that it is Russia killing children with ballistic missiles is wrong and dangerous. It only emboldens Moscow to continue the war and keep ignoring diplomacy.
While Washington has yet to respond officially, Secretary of State Marco Rubio hinted at a possible shift in policy. Speaking in Brussels on Friday following a two-day NATO meeting, Rubio suggested that Washington's patience with Moscow is wearing thin and warned that Russia could soon face additional U.S. sanctions. Amid the military crisis, Ukraine is preparing for talks in Washington next week on a new draft for a mineral deal. According to the Associated Press, Ukraine's economy minister Yulia Svididenko confirmed that a Ukrainian delegation, including officials from the Ministries of Economy, Foreign Affairs, Justice, and Finance, will head to the U.S. next week. The proposed agreement would give the U.S. access to critical resources such as rare earths, oil, and gas. European leaders are also pushing for tougher measures. French President Emmanuel Macron called for an immediate ceasefire and strong action if Russia continues to stall. Finnish President Alexander Stubb proposed April 20th, which marks both Easter and the 3-month anniversary of President Donald Trump's inauguration, as the deadline for Russia to comply with ceasefire terms. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
The death toll from the strong earthquake that struck Myanmar has risen to over 3,500. According to the Associated Press, more than 5,000 people were injured and at least 200 remain missing. Heavy rain and strong winds over the weekend disrupted rescue efforts, temporarily halting the use of electrical equipment. Despite the severe weather, recovery efforts continue with Mandalay Airport reopening and rail services to Yangon restored. Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us in the studio is our sports editor, Paul Neat. Hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Let us start with football. It's been another successful season in the French capital for Kang-in.
Yes, Paris Saint-Germain are the champions of France for the 4th year in a row. It's now 2 in a row for South Korean star Kang-in. PSG on Saturday sealed a 1-0 home win over Angers to secure the Ligue title. This meant a 22-point lead with 6 games to go. Now, Lee has made 26 appearances for PSG so far this season, scoring 6 and assisting 5 more than he did last season already. PSG have also gone unbeaten in the league so far, winning 23 from 28 matches played. And there could be more silverware as PSG have a Champions League last 8 tie with Aston Villa to come later this week and the FIFA Club World Cup in June.
And moving on to baseball, the KBO seems to set new attendance records all the time these days.
It really does. The latest is the fastest to 1 million fans. According to the KBO on Sunday, after 3 of the 5 games were sold out, there had been 1,059,380 fans in the stands so far after 60 games. The previous record was 65 games set back in 2012. There have been 30 sellouts so far this season. There were 221 in total last year, with 10.88 million fans in total. Both of those are records. But it's not all good news. The NC Dinos will play their next few home games elsewhere due to ongoing safety checks at their stadium in Changwon. A fan died last week after a piece of metal hit them on the head inside the stadium. The club had already suspended sales of tickets, and the series with the SSG Landers last week was cancelled. But now the series with the Lotte Giants will take place at Sajik Baseball Stadium in Busan instead.
And finally, in Major League Baseball, Lee Jung-hoo's excellent start to the new season continues.
Yes, 7 games in a row now for hits for him, and 2 in a row when it comes to multi-hits. Lee Jung-hoo and the San Francisco Giants beat the Seattle Mariners 5-4 on Sunday. He batted 3rd and went 2 for 4 with 1 run scored. Another hit also meant that he has a league-leading 6 doubles so far this season, and 6 is also a new career high for him, having recorded 4 last year before injury ended his season early. He batted 0 for 2 on the opening day, but has landed hits in every game since then, and 10 runs in total is the most among the Giants players. The win was the Giants' 7th in a row, and they sit top of the National League West at 8-1.
All right, thank you for the roundup. See you next week.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy the nice and warm weather today? The temperature in Seoul rose up to 20 degrees Celsius today, feeling like late April to early May already. It will be as warm as 9 degrees in the morning and 19 degrees during the day in Seoul tomorrow. The daily temperature difference will be as wide as around 10 degrees nationwide. In addition, the sky will gradually become cloudy in the west of central regions, including Seoul from tonight. There's some light rain forecast of less than 5 millimeters overnight in this area. It will mostly stop by dawn tomorrow, but it could be accompanied by gusty winds and thunderstorms. Tomorrow morning, Daejeon and Gyeongju will start off at 10 degrees, Busan at 12 degrees. Daily highs will move up to at least 19 degrees all over the country. There's more rain forecast between Wednesday and Thursday and on the weekend nationwide. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if you've signed a contract for a one room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. Just days ago, the Constitutional Court delivered a unanimous verdict, 8-0, removing President Yoon Suk-yeol from power. The ruling has not only triggered an early presidential election, but also left a gaping void in Seoul's diplomatic leadership at a time of global uncertainty and geopolitical rivalry. For months, summit diplomacy has been paralyzed under emergency rule. Now, key alliances with the United States and Japan are under scrutiny, while relations with China and Russia remain deeply fractured. The international community is closely monitoring how Seoul navigates this leadership vacuum and what comes next for its role on a world stage. Tonight, we speak to two experts to unpack the implications of this unprecedented moment. Joining us from Cambridge is Dr. Nielsen Wright, head of the Japan and Korea's program at the Center for Geopolitics. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And also joining us is Hannah Kim, assistant professor at Seogang University's GSIS. Great to see you, Professor Kim.
Thanks for having me again.
So let's start our discussion with Dr. Nielsen Wright. So, like I've said, with the removal of former President Yoon Suk-yeol from office, South Korea has entered an early presidential election phase. As an international expert, I want to ask, how do you view the impeachment and the resulting diplomatic vacuum in South Korea?
Well, as you mentioned, this was a unanimous decision, 8-0 by the Constitutional Court. I think that's a very important institutional reaffirmation of the importance of the rule of law. The court was very clear in setting out in exacting detail why now former President Yoon had acted unconstitutionally, that his claims in supporting martial law that he was justified were not, in fact, justified. I think it was a very sensible ruling and has done a great deal, I think, to reassure opinion both in Korea and abroad that the institutional guardrails, if you like, of Korean democracy are working as they are expected to do. It was also, I think, testament, of course, to the Korean people that they came out in such large numbers to defend the National Assembly on that fateful night of December 3rd, when then President Yoon made his surprising announcement. And we shouldn't forget, of course, how close it was. President Yoon might have succeeded in introducing martial law and shutting down the National Assembly, and we would be in a very, therefore, different situation if that hadn't happened. And I think it's therefore very important to emphasize that. I think it's also important to acknowledge the mature statements coming from Korean politicians on both sides of the aisle. We've heard from the Speaker of the National Assembly calling for unity, hailing this as a victory for democracy for all Koreans, for neither one side of the political divide or the other. And that, I think, has been echoed as well by statements from the leader of the PPP, the Conservative Party, apologizing for what had happened, which I think was a sensible statement on the part of their leader. But it remains to be seen whether, in fact, there will be room to really bring the two sides together. And in the 60 days that have now been established for this national election campaign, we are going to see that, if you like, that internal political division between the two sides exposed. And it will be, I think, for us to judge as we see the election unfold, how well both politicians on the right and the left manage that process and how the public responds. It is, I think, troubling that there is a sizable section of the South Korean domestic public, some 20%, who were fiercely opposed to the Constitutional Court's decision and who believe that then President Yoon acted appropriately. And I think that's an important issue to consider. On this question of the vacuum, the decision-making vacuum that you highlighted. I pick up a different mood. I was actually in the region recently. I was in Japan, and speaking to both academics and civil servants, many of them were quick to point out just how much continuity there's been. And we had just a few weeks ago a meeting of the foreign ministers of China, Japan, and South Korea in Tokyo, and I think that's testament to the effectiveness of the bureaucratic process. Acting President Han, for example, shortly after the impeachment decision, decided not to accept the resignation offers from senior ministers of the government. That was a wise move, and I think it's indicative of this commitment to keeping the government functioning, and that's been there throughout this difficult political process. So I am actually encouraged, and I think we will see, hopefully, a continuation of stable government, both at home and in terms of South Korea's foreign policy.
Right. So viewers from South Korea, not only South Korea, but also international viewers would be closely watching how the situation unfolds in the next few months. Now to Professor Kim. Since the declaration of martial law in December last year, South Korea has been unable to, engage in a summit diplomacy at the presidential level. What do you see as the most urgent diplomatic and security issues that need to be addressed?
Okay, so I do think that, because of everything that has happened the past few months, and with an acting president and the acting president changing several times, things have remained relatively frozen under the acting president system. And now, today, things are a lot more politically stable than they were last week, but still there are a lot of urgent diplomatic and security issues. Two that really come to mind right now. The first one is reciprocal tariffs. Trump announced that South Korea is subject to a 25% tariff on exports to the U.S. I think there was some confusion about whether the actual percentage was 26% or 25%, but now it's actually officially 25%. And these measures are set to take effect on April 9th. So this is a very significant shift from the cooperative framework established by the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. And so it is very important right now for South Korea to restart trade dialogue. Acting President Han Duck-soo has called for negotiations regarding this, but again, because of so much domestic instability we've seen the past few months, this was kind of put on hold and it was not a priority. Another issue is the sensitive country risk. So in January, the U.S. Department of Energy added South Korea to its sensitive and other designated countries list, the SCL, and it was ranked relatively lower, but it was still placed there because of the political instability that we saw in South Korea over the past few months. And, in many ways now we are seeing South Korea's democratic resilience, but there's a lot to catch up on, especially in regards to not just relations with the U.S., but a lot of other political and security issues.
Right. So, though there had been, discussions in, officials level, there had been, leadership vacancy, but these issues like Trump's tariff proposal and sensitive list, we had to, go through this. So more discussions would be definitely necessary. Now, the impeachment of President Yoon has put U.S.-South Korea diplomacy in a similar situation to 8 years ago during the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how was the situation evolved compared to back then? And also, the U.S. State Department has said it's willing to work with acting President Han Duck-soo and the Korean government. What kind of response do you believe is necessary from our part?
Well, I think, there are two critical issues. As Professor Kim pointed out, this question of tariffs is really so critically important, not just for South Korea, but of course for lots of other countries. We cannot, I think, overstate the dramatic nature of the Trump administration in terms of its willingness to depart from all the norms that previously underscored US-ROK relations. We have seen statements when it comes to security cooperation between the US and South Korea from Secretary of State Rubio and others, and Joseph Yun, the acting US ambassador in South Korea, stressing the fact that the relationship continues to be solid, that the alliance relationship is as strong as ever. But President Trump has demonstrated his kind of mercurial character. There's been a lot of speculation about the possibility that he might be minded at some point to try and do a deal with North Korea. And also, of course, his view of alliances and who counts as friends is a real departure from previous administrations. So I think closer ties with the United States will remain important. I think any leader, and of course there's a big question mark who's likely to be the front runner when it comes to the election in 60 days' time. The leader of the Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, of course, has often been seen as somewhat a departure from the approach of the Yoon administration when it comes to emphasizing alliance ties. I think that's partly exaggerated. I think we will see a more pragmatic approach on the part of President Lee if he's elected in 60 days' time, as seems likely given the polls. But for now, I think the importance is finding a way to work with the United States, not only because so much of South Korea's trade depends on a close relationship with the United States, but also because of the security threat from North Korea, and of course the wider concerns about vulnerability in the face of America changing its approach to its alliance relationships, much more transactional and much more conditional than was once the case.
Right, so dialogue and negotiations with the United States would be very crucial and urgent at this point. Now, former President Yoon emphasized value-based diplomacy and pursued a foreign policy that's centered on the U.S. And Japan and South Korea. The U.S. media is now highlighting the possibility of a potential shift in South Korea's diplomatic direction under the next administration. What's your take on this?
Well, I think there's a danger that we exaggerate too much the gap between, or the difference between the way candidates perform in elections and the way they behave once they become elected. Senior advisors close to, for example, Lee Jae-myung, have said both on the record and in a variety of contexts that the next president, if it is Lee Jae-myung, is likely to be very pragmatic. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that South Korea has very few options, given its relatively middle-ranking size. However, it has to be said that when it comes to values, the world has changed dramatically. We are seeing the Trump administration depart from all the norms and values that were at the center point of American foreign policy for most of the Cold War. We're seeing that both in terms of domestic policy, the sort of pressure that has been brought to bear on political opponents at home, the stifling of dissent, the closing down of the Voice of America, for example, the departure from real important established norms. And therefore, at this juncture, with Korean democracy having shown itself to have been pretty resilient in the face of former President Yoon's grab for power, there is an argument for saying that South Korea should be doing more in the values-based arena and working with other like-minded countries. And for that requires, I think, much more diplomatic flexibility and consideration of other partnerships, whether it's with Japan, another liberal democracy, of course, in the region, or Australia, or with European partners. South Korea and the United Kingdom, where I'm speaking to you today, is a country that has a very strong relationship with South Korea, a new strategic partnership that was the product of the Yoon administration. And I suppose it's worth our while remembering just what was achieved under Yoon's foreign policy. There was much, I think, to admire about his approach to foreign policy, notwithstanding his failings at home when it came to domestic politics. Those sorts of strategic partnerships become much more important, and especially when it comes to emphasizing the importance of open societies, the rule of law, the importance of institutional guarantees of the rule of law at home. Countries like South Korea, Lee Jae-myung has hailed it as a victory, this decision by the court as a victory for K-democracy, can use that success as a way of going out internationally and forming stronger partnerships with other like-minded countries.
Right, so we would definitely see a lot of changes if the administration changes. Now, given this, former President Yoon has pushed for improved Korea-Japan relations through trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. And Tokyo is also closely monitoring the impact of President Yoon's impeachment on bilateral relations. After the ruling, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba emphasized the importance of cooperation with Korea regardless of which administration takes office. Do you foresee any changes in South Korea's diplomatic approach towards Japan, Professor Kim?
There might be, as you mentioned, former President Yoon did push for trilateral cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. And we really saw this come to light during the Camp David summit that took place in 2023. Interestingly, all of the leaders that participated in the Camp David summit are now no longer in office. But at the same time, Prime Minister Ishiba has continuously emphasized that maintaining cooperation, regardless of which administration is in power in Korea, is necessary. Now, similarly, Acting President Han Duck-seo has consistently emphasized the importance of robust trilateral relations. But at the same time, we have seen that President Trump has taken a much more transactional approach in terms of the relationship between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. And we're also quite unsure as to what the next administration will be doing in terms of its approach to these relations. A full reversal is very unlikely. A new administration may be more cautious and maybe have a more balanced approach. There may be some renewed sensitivity towards historical issues, but at the same time, there are shared concerns related to North Korea. And so trilateral relations with the U.S. and Japan, along with South Korea, is going to remain continuously important.
It would definitely be important, but we'll have to see how each interest would unfold. Now, on the other hand, some people suggest that since the U.S. values trilateral cooperation with South Korea and Japan to check on China, it would not welcome any instability in Seoul-Tokyo relations. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how much of an influence would you expect, and how do you see ties moving forward?
Well, I would sort of echo what's been said already, that, it's important for Seoul to continue to cooperate with Japan. There's little to be gained, if anything, by adopting a confrontational approach. And there's every reason now for closer cooperation, precisely because the Trump administration has shown itself willing to bully and pressure its closest allies. I think, there will always be, very understandably, concerns over history. And they will flare up from time to time. And it's, I think, very important to recognize why, for the bulk of the Korean population, the persistent frustrations associated with Japan's unwillingness to address some of those issues in a way that feel genuine and based on significant contrition remain a source of great discontent. But nonetheless, I think the immediacy of the changes to the global environment require South Korea to work more closely with other partners. And when it comes to Japan, of course, the Ishiba administration is a minority administration. Prime Minister Ishiba is facing very real pressures at home. There is a lot of speculation whether he will remain in office for the foreseeable future. There is an important upper house election scheduled for July of this year. It's an open question of whether the LDP will be able to hang on to enough seats to maintain its majority in the upper house. If it doesn't, there is the possibility that Mr. Ishiba will be ousted by his parliamentary colleagues. There is even some speculation looking ahead to that election that Prime Minister Ishiba might be minded to hold a snap double election, an election for both the lower and the upper house simultaneously, in an effort to bolster turnout and thereby increase support for the LDP. That might also backfire. We might find ourselves with a different type of government in South Korea that might or might not be more cooperative with South Korea. So I think those are real issues. And when it comes to the United States, it's interesting to note that just a few weeks ago, the designated individual who would be appointed as the number 3 in the Defense Department, Elbridge Colby, was asked in his Senate testimony what counts as the most existentially important issues for the United States. And the only country he singled out was Japan. Why is that important? Because it effectively, implicitly leaves Korea and Taiwan outside the formal remit for American security guarantees. And that is creating a lot of anxiety, not only in Japan, but also in South Korea, about the reliability of US security guarantees. And we all know that there are pressures in South Korea to consider, for example, the nuclear option of South Korea acquiring its own independent nuclear capabilities. In an environment where America's reliability is being questioned, to reiterate what I was saying earlier, we need more cooperation, and countries like Japan are an essential part of that process.
Let's also touch upon North Korea before we conclude our discussion. On April 3rd, during the NATO foreign ministers meeting, the foreign ministers of South Korea, U.S. and Japan reaffirmed the goal of complete denuclearization of North Korea. But given the ongoing concerns that the role of cooperation may diminish, do you think South Korea should expand its leading role in responding to North Korea's nuclear issue, Professor Kim?
I think that South Korea should expand its leadership role, especially right now, because in many ways domestically, South Korea has been experiencing a lot of political turmoil. And so this would be a good opportunity for South Korea to really show that it is kind of taking a step forward and working with the global system in terms of providing more support, not just towards its allies, but also in terms of what it would do related to North Korea. Now, when there are moments of instability, these moments can be exploited. And historically, North Korea has timed missile launches or aggressive rhetoric during these moments. And during a time like this, during leadership vacuums, there might not be a clear and unified response. Also, it can delay responses. So it's important now for South Korea to try to reopen, not just improve relations with the United States and Japan, as we've been talking about earlier, but also to try to reopen dialogue channels with North Korea, even if it's informal. South Korea should also try to continue to work more proactively with the international community and with regional and international forums like NATO and the UN and ASEAN, because it's going to be important for South Korea to focus on building coalitions right now and reaffirming extended deterrence. And in this way, if South Korea takes a step forward in terms of playing a leading role, this can also showcase that domestically, Korea is now seeing a bit more domestic political stability.
Right, so we would really have to become more proactive in terms of relations with other countries, including North Korea as well. I had a lot of questions more, but we are running out of time, so this would have to be, we would have to close our discussion right here. Many thanks to Professor Kim and Dr. Nielsen Wright for sharing your valuable insights this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
How to survive in Korea. Workplace. Step 1. Lunchtime. The most important morning routine is to check to